Welcome. You are entering CCNA's studio in STEM City, USA. CCNA is committed to equity in education, social justice, and health.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jim Page from CCNA, and welcome to our session this morning on mental health. We've got some very special guests this morning, and I'll introduce them in a minute. But first, thank you for spending some time with us this morning. We've been focusing on mental health for the last couple of years, and this is an opportunity for us to further that discussion. So, without further ado, let me introduce our special guest. First, Dr. GiShawn Mance from Howard University School of Psychology. Dr. Mance, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And Dr. Mance, you have a very special student with you. Could you introduce her, please?
Absolutely. I have Kelly Garrett. She is a fifth-year doctoral student at Howard University. I've been working with Kelly actually since she's an undergraduate at Howard University. Hi, Kelly.
Kelly, welcome.
Yes. Hello. Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Kelly, before we get started, tell us in about 30 seconds a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and your work with Dr. Mance.
Yes. So I'm a student at Howard University in the clinical psychology doctoral program. And I also went to undergrad at Howard University, like Dr. Mance had mentioned, and got my bachelor's in psychology. I'm originally from New York, and I'm just really passionate about mental health and just community work. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that today, but just really passionate about working with communities and just addressing mental health and stigma in our communities. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be joined by Sheriff Case in a few minutes. He's running a little late, but let's go ahead and get started, Dr. Mance. Let's talk about what you're doing here in the city, how you got started working with the sheriff and the other first responders, and pretty much give us an update of what you're doing and how you got started.
Please. Absolutely. I did want to make one correction. Kelly's in her fourth year of the program. I'm pushing her through faster than she is. Okay. Fourth year. And the reason why I wanted to clarify that because when working with Kelly and students similar to Kelly who have interest in community-based participatory research. So whether it's community-based interventions, addressing relevant public health, mental health and public health related issues within communities, we've been partnering with various communities, and that is something that is very much of interest to a majority of our students. So the Mance, I call it the Mance Research Group. Our lab is the Youth and Communities Lab. We partner, so currently we're partnering with the first responders, specifically CCNA, great connectors that have connected us with the first responders in the city of Alexandria, and specifically with the Sheriff's Office to promote mental health wellness, trauma-informed professional development, and behavioral health options. So as the clinical psychology doctoral program at Howard University builds collaborations and communities and agencies in the surrounding area to address health disparities and expand mental health wellness and awareness, one of the things that we are honing in on with the Sheriff's Office is to address mental health and reduce stigma, particularly in the workforce and with, I would say, professions where there is a large stigma, where there's this extreme sense of vulnerability if you do just announce or show a need for mental health, right? So because we are committed to community mental health and social justice, that is an emphasis in our program. We traditionally had the model of child and adult track within the clinical psychology doctoral program, but Howard is adopting a community mental health and social justice approach to our training, and having this collaboration is in direct alignment with our mission and goal to focus on mental health and social justice.
Quick question for you. You're working just with the workforce, not with the other portions of the Sheriff's Office? Or are you just dealing with the staff?
Currently, just the staff. Currently, just with the staff. And there is discussion to expand it to work, and there's been essentially requests to provide mental health services to the inmates, right? But right now we are working with the workforce, so the employees of the Sheriff's Office.
Going further, can you talk about your students very quickly? I know you've got several grad students who on the Mance team. Could you talk about them very quickly?
Oh, absolutely. They're an amazing group of graduate students. And I'm definitely going to allow Kelly to kind of speak to her research. So they entered the team, and we typically have what we call a lab or a overarching lab project. And then the students are kind of tasked with their individual research projects to meet the programmatic milestones. So my students are more advanced students in the program, so they're all working on their dissertations. And so the dissertation is close to one of the last steps in the program. So most of my students have completed or close to completing all of their coursework, and they're working on that final dissertation project where the dissertation is essentially extensive research. They are contributing to a body of literature to kind of leave their mark in the field, if you will. And our students, my students, I have one student that's focusing on stigma. So attitudes towards mental health engagement, stigma, and specifically in African-American emerging adults ages 18 to 25. Well, actually, she extended to 29. So my lab, we primarily focus with emerging adults is kind of like our population of focus, 18 to 29. In regards to their development, what are the stressors and coping. So the umbrella kind of topic that we address is stress and coping. So all of the students have different projects that kind of lean towards stress and coping. Kelly specifically, I'll let her talk about her research, looks at social disadvantage in neighborhoods and the impact it has on mental health. And then there's another student that's focusing on racial identity, exposure to news-based trauma, and mental health. So there
Is
are
that part of the curriculum? You've got several portions to the curriculum.
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
And that's the curriculum that you've developed for specifically for this project. Is that right?
Well, that's one of the topic areas, right? So for this project with the Sheriff's Office, we have a series of professional development workshops, and we have 4 key components after meeting with Sheriff Casey over, I would say, several months, just to kind of get an idea of what are the needs of the Sheriff's Office and employees. And so the first professional development workshop that Kelly and I co-facilitated was understanding trauma responses, the brain, and coping. And then in February, we will facilitate a workshop on stigma and mental health. The following October will be race-related stress and mental health strategies to addressing both in the workplace. And then our last kind of workshop in the series will be building and maintaining a culture of support.
Before we go to Kelly, Sheriff Casey is knocking on the door. If he's available, we'll have him come in and introduce himself. Good morning, Sheriff Casey. You're on mute, Sheriff Casey.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was running a little bit late. I was coaching my daughter's soccer game, so I apologize for that. But yes, good morning. I'm Sheriff Sean Casey, Sheriff here in the city of Alexandria, and happy to be with you all here this morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Sean, first question. Did your daughter win?
Well, Colonel Page, they don't really count wins and losses. But unfortunately, this game, the other team did score more goals than we did. So I think that
she played well. That's all that counts.
She did. She
Is it
played
just
well.
bad coaching on your part? Bad coaching, right? On your part.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'll take the blame.
Kelly, before we go to you, I'd like for Sean to share very briefly how you got associated with Dr. Mance and what your visions are for what you're doing together.
Well, I met Dr. Mance through Colonel Page and CCNA. So CCNA and Dr. Mance had connected, and then Colonel Page saw an opportunity for CCNA to be connected, for public safety to be connected with Dr. Mance, because I had brought up to Colonel Page the issues that we were having with mental health and the challenges that we were having not only internally as an agency, but externally with the community. And so Colonel Page saw an opportunity to connect Dr. Mance, who is an expert in the field of mental health, with public safety, including myself, Chief Hayes of the police department, and Chief Smedley of the fire department, to see what we could do and what we could come up with that would help both internally with my agency and externally. And as Dr. Mance just outlined, we've got a great program ahead of us as a result.
Great, super. Kelly, let me come to you. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, Kelly, and then we'll come back to the sheriff and Dr. Mance.
Yeah, so specifically what I'm doing, I'm currently the community liaison for the network project. And essentially what I'm doing is partnering with different organizations in the DMV area to gain a better understanding of, because really what our project focuses on is understanding the experiences of youth in the communities and understanding their experiences with trauma and stress. And essentially what we're doing is partnering with different organizations because, you know, those are the organizations that are actually working in the community and getting to interact with these youth. And with the research that we're doing, we want to partner with these organizations to kind of come to a better understanding. The research that we're doing called community-based participatory research, it's much different from other typical research that psychologists usually engage in. A lot of times psychologists may just, you know, go to a school or get participants and just give them questionnaires. But with the specific research we're doing, community-based research, is different because we kind of get to have community organizations have a voice and sharing the issues that are going on in the community rather than just kind of giving a questionnaire where they're not even able to really give much insight on their experience. We really just want to gain relationships because a lot of times with research, it hasn't always been about gaining relationships. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the Tuskegee study, but studies like that have been done in, you know, African American communities and other minority communities where people haven't had a voice and have been taken advantage of. But the type of research that we're doing, it's really focused on giving people a voice and allowing people to give us their perspective on what's going on in the community. And that's really overall what our research efforts are, to bring in the community, have people give us perspectives, and then eventually build a community-based intervention that is for the communities that we're working with, essentially.
Great. For Dr. Mance and for Sheriff Casey, when you first got started, can you talk about how you agreed to approach the project? You know, how long it's going to be, the things you're going to touch, and specifically what a win would be for each of you. Sean for you, and then Dr. Mance for you. What's the value added to the project? Let me start with you, Sean.
Well, you know, when that was what took us some time, because we both it was pretty clear what we both wanted to achieve, which was more mental health awareness, both internally in our agency and then externally for those that we serve. And how can we interject that into our community and into our organization so that there's no more stigma that's associated around it, right? And then also exploring mental health and how it relates to those in the African American community and how it might be different for that group of people as opposed to different groups of people, for the struggles and things that have happened and continue to happen over time and in society. So those were two areas that we both agreed upon that we wanted to explore further and that aligned, you know, with our missions. But the question was, how do we accomplish that in an agency that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where, you know, we have 205 employees, and how do we present it in a way that will be received, and how do we do it in a way that won't impact our operations? And so Dr. Mance and I met. We discussed that. She completely understood the constraints and the issues that I have with running this organization and also providing the training. And so she met with my training staff, and they did a phenomenal job of coordinating these training blocks in a way that we're able to provide about an hour, 2 hours of training for every staff member in a monthly format over these 4 different quarters. And it's been very well received. I think it's just the right amount of time. And it's been working really well. So, you know, we're finding that balance. Where we're still able to get our jobs done, but also receive this very important training that'll be beneficial both to the agency and the community.
Dr. Mance, what's your thoughts on how you got started?
Oh, I think Sheriff Casey kind of summarized it beautifully. And one of the things I really appreciate with working with Sheriff Casey was those authentic conversations we had in regards to stigma In certain workforces, there's just a stigma around mental health and really kind of chipping away of like, okay, how are we going to address this? We just can't come out just speaking with it and believing that folks will be receptive to it. So kind of having the sense of familiarity. So I definitely appreciate his judgment and knowledge to slowly kind of introduce and integrate me to the employees so they can get some sense of familiarity. So by whether it was visiting the detention center, visiting the sheriff's office, meeting the command staff, and even meeting some of the other employees, just visiting to see what the process is in regards to what the employees do, from even down to visiting the courthouse and kind of seeing the sheriff's role in the courthouse. So it was definitely a relationship that we're kind of building to have this sense of familiarity and understanding so we can better define, like, okay, if we're going to build workshops that can begin to chip away at the stigma of mental health, it has to be in the language that the workforce can understand and receive, but then also to really address what some of the common, like, I don't know, stereotypes or perceptions are within that particular field. And I really appreciate those honest conversations, the slow integration, the sense of familiarity. So having that forethought to really kind of work collaboratively together so that when we reached October and it was time for the workshops, there was this, when I was facilitating the workshops, I could look out and say, oh, I remember you, and I remember you. And I did that intentionally so the others could say, oh, there's this sense of familiarity, right? And I think that really helped with the facilitation. And it was an iterative process. I learned each time we ran the workshop, and Kelly can say, I would come back and say, Kelly, I made some adjustments. And then the next one, Kelly, I took this out and I added this in, because it was just kind of learning and understanding what some of the concerns were and how they would receive, the employees would receive different information.
So do you think that the staff is enjoying what you're doing? I'll ask Kelly that. You've been there a couple of times. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that like the staff are learning a lot from us as I'm learning a lot from them. Our training's focused on stress and trauma, and just the staff being able to be so open and vulnerable with sharing, experiences that they have had with trauma. A lot of people who are first responders do experience what is called vicarious trauma, where you're working with communities and populations that have experienced trauma, such as, inmates, and they're experiencing that themselves. And then they're going home and having stress from those experiences. And so I think it was just really helpful to hear from them what they've experienced. And then also, in addition to that, we kind of got to talk about self-care, which I really enjoyed, because I actually got to facilitate that part where they were able to assess their own self-care in different situations and come out and kind of develop a better understanding of how they can implement self-care. Because, in this field, you're so prone to just stress and burnout, and self-care is really a way to address that. And they were able to kind of take away some things from that discussion that we had, which I was really grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
Sheriff Casey, I know that the city does a great job supporting you and your staff in mental health, health department, community health and human services. How does this fit into your overall plan to address mental health?
It fits in really, really well. A big priority of mine when I took office was for us to find ways to address mental health with the staff. And because that's such a big part of making sure that our staff is prepared to do the job that we're asking them to do, but also giving them the support they need to do the job that they're being asked to do. But also externally, how mental health factors into the folks that we deal with every day that are inside the jail, how we deal with the folks that are in our community. There are a lot of mental health consumers. And there is a struggle right now in our community, in the nation, that there's a lack of mental health resources and assistance for a lot of the folks that need it. So I think this partnership and the work that we're doing is only going to help broaden my staff's horizons as how to handle folks in crisis. And also it's going to open up possibilities for us to bring in more mental health services for the folks that are in our jail. And eventually my hope is to continue to work with city stakeholders, state stakeholders, and folks like Dr. Mance to, look at how we can work in the criminal justice system on diversionary programs for those that are struggling with mental health, not necessarily in need of maybe criminal attention, but mental health attention, even though they might have somehow gotten swooped into the criminal justice system. So that's a big part of it too. And I think by doing what we're doing now, it opens up the opportunity for us to explore that pathway and prepare us better to move forward in the future to truly address the mental health issues that both our community and first responders have.
Yeah. Dr. Mance, when we first met the sheriff and his staff, can you kind of share your first impressions walking into the room of a jail and seeing the staff thinking, what did I get myself into here? Can you share a little bit?
My thought was, okay, it's going to be interesting to see how receptive that the staff would be, and just to kind of open that conversation. But they were very interested. I would say the people who I met, they were very interested in kind of presenting to the command staff. The feedback that I received was that this is needed. This is very much needed. I wish we would have had these conversations years ago when I was like starting my training or starting within the field, and just kind of talking about over the course of even the 20 years or the 25 years that some of them have been there, like just that conversation of mental health entering the workplace and being very thankful for that, and also acknowledging Sheriff Casey's, I'm going to say initiative to really kind of normalize the discussion of mental health, and just having a space for the staff, for the employees to be able to have a conversation around mental health. It became very evident when facilitating the workshops, particularly the last two workshops, because it was a different set of employees each time, right? And so it was the conversation of, well, I can't use my EAP because they might report back to the agency. So really kind of dispelling some of those myths, really, that are a barrier, significant barriers that would not necessarily allow a person to receive the treatment or seek the treatment that they need. And even the rollout of, there's a Sheriff Casey can speak to the app, this wellness app that the Sheriff's Department has. And it was typically this new rollout, it was an update to the app. And the app is, I guess it's been out for about a year, but there's been this significant update. And I had a chance to kind of look at some of the information and just really kind of emphasizing that as a tool within my presentation. And even having the feedback of folks kind of saying, oh, that app. And so having an awareness of it, but not kind of utilizing it. And so kind of saying, yeah, this is an option, right? Here are some mental health options. So surprisingly, when I first entered, I was like, this is going to be interesting, because the stereotype is in this type of work that you do, you can't be vulnerable, right? It is a field that is essentially the notion of being strong, and strength is what you kind of put forth. That's what you lead with. Right. And you cannot be vulnerable, because if you're vulnerable, then you're weak. Right. So, and there's so many implications to what that may mean for a person in regards to their career trajectory, and their safety. Right. So beginning to have that conversation and being surprised of like, yes, we want this, but also recognizing there's still of like, yeah, I need it. I recognize it, but I don't trust that I can navigate these tools and it won't impact my career development, right? So even though it was like, yes, I wish we've had this years ago, it was also, yeah, it's nice to have it, but let me hear the information to the resources, but I'm still a little bit skeptical. So that's why I think Sheriff Casey and I are hoping that over the series and kind of spreading it out, and just giving that sense of familiarity. If anything, it's just mental health resources are an option. Not something that's just out there, but you're not utilizing, but really saying, okay, this is an option for me.
John, can you talk about the app, the wellness app?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Dr. Mance, for bringing that up. The Cortico Wellness app. It's an app that is dedicated for both mental and physical wellness of first responders, and this app is tailored to the particular law enforcement agency that it's serving. So we entered into an agreement with them about a year ago, as Dr. Mance said. And the purpose of this app is to give our staff anonymous, one-touch access to mental health and physical health resources, with a little bit heavier on mental health resources. So this app allows for our staff to have one button, and they're in touch with our Spring Health Employee Assistance Program, with a suicide hotline. And then also has one button touch support to our peer support team, which are individuals within our agency that have a relationship with our staff in a way that they can trust them with confidential and private information. And they provide them peer support, just as the name of the team outlines. In addition, it has the ability to give our staff direct access to healthcare providers under our insurance umbrellas that provide mental health services to them. So it gives them a list. So if you have United Healthcare or Kaiser, here's a list of mental health providers that you could see. And then it has a bunch of great, mindfulness and mental health, wellness videos, physical health, wellness, financial health. And it's all custom made for the Alexandria Sheriff's Office. And it also is anonymous. It's same username and password for everybody. Also, all of our employees' families have access to it as well. That's part of it. So it's a great thing, and it's a great tool for our staff. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more use and success we'll have with it.
Before I go back to Kelly, you are taking the lead among the sheriff, the police, and the fire department. What is your conversation with Chief Smedley and Chief Hayes about what you're doing right now? Or have you had any conversations with them? Sean, to you. Sean?
Was that for me or for Kelly?
It's for you, Sean. I was asking about you being the lead agency for this project. Have you had any conversations with Chief Smedley or Chief Hayes about the progress you're making and the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, we talk all the time, and I tell them it's been great. We're making great, phenomenal progress, and Dr. Mance and her team have been outstanding partners with us. They've adapted well to our needs, and it's been a great thing. So we're very encouraging, and hopefully they can do the same in the future.
Dr. Mance, you plan to go to the fire department next, is that correct? Or is it the police department? The fire. Have you talked to Chief Smedley? What's your conversation with Chief Smedley about what you're going to do with him?
In our last conversation, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I probably need to connect just to kind of get an idea of a timeline and a rollout. But it was very much one of the things that Chief Smedley brought up was the generational differences, kind of really seeing how the response to the stressors and trauma exposure from the generational differences, and particularly for that emerging adults, those new folks entering the field, and how they are adjusting and the difficulties they are having. So a lot of our conversation kind of centered around building similar workshops, but being more specific to what the needs are for his staff.
Great. And then after that would be the police department with Chief Hayes. Is that right?
Correct.
Good. Mm-hmm. Kelly, let me come back to you as a grad student. Mm-hmm. When you leave this what do you want to take away from this project when you go into your personal office and profession of a clinical psychologist? Yeah. What do you want to take?
Well, I'm taking a lot. Actually, when I came into the program, I was initially really interested in working with children, and I still really want to work with children. However, just having the experience to work with individuals who are in law enforcement, it's really just opened my eyes to the experiences that first responders have. And obviously, I think that there is always this kind of stigma of mental health, but I think just being able to address that in plain sight and just bring awareness to it, I want to continue this community-based work within my own work. So this is kind of like just an introduction to where I will hopefully continue to go, and just working with communities and just doing research. Again, like I said, a lot of times previous years in research, people have just kind of gone into the communities, gave a questionnaire and left. But through this work I've gotten able to do with Dr. Mance, I've been able to actually build a partnership. And that says a lot, and just building relationships with people, and again, hearing people who have a voice, and not just kind of coming up with my own perspective as a professional, but getting to hear other people's insight, and that adding on to my knowledge as a professional. So I definitely want to just continue partnering with communities who really need this help.
Kelly, I was with you the first time you came into the sheriff's office as a young Black woman. What was your impression as you walked into the first meeting? Were you afraid? Were you uncomfortable? Were you anxious? What
I was actually, well, I feel like with Chief Smedley, he made me feel very comfortable. I walked in and he was like, "Oh, we got snacks, we got water." So honestly, I mean, I felt very comfortable. I think when, initially, I guess I just didn't know what to expect. So that's kind of what made me nervous. However, what I really gained from that conversation with Chief Smedley, again, I've done a lot of work with children. I haven't really worked with first responders, but just to hear how he said how some of these people are seeing people die on a regular basis. They're walking into really just traumatic situations where people are hurt. And so just hearing what people have to experience in that role every single day just opened my eyes to what first responders experience, and just understanding how important mental health is for that population. So again, this is just work that I definitely want to continue, and I think is really valuable.
I've had a conversation with and among the chiefs in the city and Dr. Mance. It's really clear that leadership is the key for a successful project. So, Dr. Mance, when you and Chief Casey or Sheriff Casey are talking about the next steps, well, what are some of the things you want to do beyond this project? I know you have some stuff in the back of your mind, some new initiatives, new concepts you want to try.
Well, actually, it's still a part of this project. So beyond the professional development workshops, we are in talks, or essentially kind of considering what we call process groups. So, and that would allow the mutual benefit is essentially allowing my clinical psychology students to be able to get the experience to run groups and have that supervision. So essentially they're honing their clinical skills and really learning about group processes. And then the other aspect of it is essentially offering a mental health option for those who want to engage in the process groups. Essentially it's just an option, those who want to volunteer. And I think kind of starting with, I'm not sure, Sheriff Casey, we're still kind of talking about whether it start off with those who want to volunteer, whether it's the command staff or other staff members. But that was one aspect of it. And that will kind of roll out once we finish, probably once we finish the workshops. But then also kind of meeting some of the other staff and meeting, I want to say her last name is Irvin, Miss Irvin, who works specifically with like programs for those who are incarcerated. And she was just like, "Hey, can we get some of the groups here?" And so kind of having that conversations of students being able to provide psychoeducation groups. So essentially it's just a conversation. It's not saying that this is going to happen, but really kind of thinking about the logistics of, is that possible? Can we make that happen? What are some of the barriers? Is it best if another agency does these things? But essentially, again, it's just brainstorming to kind of how can we expand mental health resources and options in the workplace.
Dr. Mance, when you invite Sheriff Casey up to Howard to speak to your students, what do you want him to cover?
What would I like for him to cover? Really emphasize the need, essentially the need for collaborations, right? The need for collaborations and utilizing resources, and kind of how important it is for his workforce as it relates to partnering with mental health professionals or mental health trainees, and what is essentially the mutual benefit. So really emphasizing that. And because our program is moving towards the approach of community mental health and social justice, just kind of speaking from honestly, from a social justice perspective in regards to mental health and its collaboration, not just a collaboration with mental health professionals, but very specifically with the HBCU, like the value of that. What is the value for that he sees in partnering with Howard specifically?
You mentioned HBCUs. Are you talking about the schools that have mental health departments or psychology departments, or just in general?
Partnering
with talked about that earlier.
Well, partnering specifically with an HBCU, so partnering with Howard specifically. So the value of partnering with a Howard. Let me say this, and people may not know this, but Howard is just one of 2 historically Black universities that has an accredited clinical psychology doctoral program. There's only 2. So there's Howard University and it's Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi, that have an accredited clinical psychology doctoral program. There are other HBCUs that may be affiliated with programs as part of a consortium, but they're the 2 that have standalone accredited clinical psychology doctoral programs. And we were the first. Howard was the first to establish a doctoral program in clinical psychology.
Howard is always first. Howard is always you mentioned criminal justice. Criminal justice and mental health. What's the connection in your mind? You mentioned criminal justice and mental health.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit.
Dr. Mance, this is to you.
You were breaking
up. You mentioned criminal justice and mental health. The intersection of criminal justice and mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So social justice. Yeah, social justice and mental health. So part of that training is essentially kind of going beyond. Traditionally, when we think about psychology and mental health, we think about the therapy room, right? The therapist and the patient or the client, right? And the work that's done within the therapy room or with family. So the family was in the therapy room along with the provider. But when we kind of think about the social justice, is essentially the importance of mental health professionals really kind of advocating for whether it's mental health equity, right? Who has access to services and how often they have the access and the quality of those services, right? And also just kind of destigmatizing mental health. So kind of think about social justice from that perspective as it relates to mental health and just different ways of whether it's service delivery, whether it's different ways in how we begin to kind of think about mental health and what mental health can look like for different populations. And again, kind of policies within the workplace as it relates to mental health. So when we're kind of use that language of social justice in regards to kind of going beyond the therapy room and just really kind of making an impact for policies, procedures, and justice as it relates to mental health.
Sheriff Casey, I know that you've got a pretty top flight to executive staff. When Dr. Mance has her sessions, what is the conversation that you and your staff have after she leaves? What are some of the observations and recommendations from your perspective?
It's been very positive. I've had many people, my staff approach me and say it's exactly what we needed. This was very helpful. And it's starting to break down those walls and break down those barriers. We're starting to see that happen. Staff is, opening up. They're engaging. They're listening. And I think that it's sending a clear message that we at the executive staff level do care about our staff. And this is an example of that. And that we have a partner in Dr. Mance and her team that also care about our staff, which, in our profession, in law enforcement, we feel sometimes like we're not appreciated. It's just how it is because we work in a very challenging and difficult and, be honest, negative environment. It's just that's the environment we work in. And so to have folks to come in, especially outside individuals like Dr. Mance and her team, and yourself too, Colonel Page, to come in and show support and caring means a lot. And I think we're making a lot of headway. My executive staff sees it. I see it. And I think the future is very bright moving forward with this collaborative partnership that we have.
So this is a good deal for your staff, you think?
Absolutely. It's a great deal for
It
my
is.
staff. Yep.
The other thing, Sean, we talked about just individual self-care. You as the sheriff, you've got the struggles of evictions and all those things that are on your plate. Does this help you in your personal role?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I sat through the training like everyone else. I was in the first session. And every time Dr. Mance comes in and talks and gives our staff, our inmate population, myself, any kind of opportunity to talk about trauma and being informed about trauma and how trauma can affect you, and how it can affect you physically and mentally, it's very helpful. It's very helpful because it puts a lot of perspective on the things that I've been through in my career, and it helps me deal with the day-to-day stressors of this job. So I can speak for myself that the services and the information, the training that Dr. Mance and her team have provided have helped me. They continue to help me. So it's been great. It's been
How
very
about you,
impactful.
Dr. Mance? Same for you. What did you learn about yourself? Dr. Mance, same question for you.
Same question. What have I learned? I wanted to add, as Sheriff Casey was speaking, I wanted to add that I had a couple of the staff members to email me and say, "Hey, when you talked about this section, it made me think about this," and they sent me materials. And so and that's why I was kind of like, "Oh, the presentation would change each week because I incorporate it." Like they sent me a clip, I incorporate the clip. They sent me a meme in regards to mental health, but it was relevant. And so one of the things that I learned is that when you open up conversations, when you allow folks to kind of sit at the table and have conversations about what the needs are, and you really take that in and process and be able to meet the needs, and do it collaboratively, that there can be slow and progressive change, right? And what I mean by that is, particularly for Sheriff Casey, is that for the most part, you could say that he's new to the position, right? I think he's been in the position for about 2 years. So prior to those 2 years, there was like years of folks who are kind of thinking the notion that having mental health and the discussion of mental health in the workplace, there just isn't room for it in the workplace. But the slow kind of chipping away to having these conversations, to having these resources like the app, and bringing in professionals who are talking about mental health, bringing in trainees, and seeing that, I think it's the slow kind of chipping away so that there can be a new perspective, and just being able to be a part of that. What I've learned is that is slow and steady wins the race, right? Just slow and steady, and being a part of it, having those conversations are just extremely important.
Is there a component in the program that talks about the way officials treat citizens? Is there a passionate portion that says, now that I've had this training, I can better understand how to deal with someone struggling with mental health or an emergency? Do you talk about that at all? Or can you?
We're hoping that part of our training, where we're kind of talking about building and maintaining a culture of support. So not just support within the workplace, but a culture of support as it relates to interfacing with the community. And what does that look like? And kind of recognizing and identifying where things are a trauma response. So even though the reality is that law enforcement has a certain type of training, right? And in that training, you have to respond. Like it's almost like stimulus and response, but that notion of how you respond is really important, because it could be life or death, right? And that's the reality and the nature of the work. And so part of kind of building that culture of support in regards to kind of the more we understand mental health for ourselves, we can kind of understand mental health of others, and it may help navigate the way in which they're navigating and interfacing with the community. So it's more of not a direct discussion, but more of an indirect of having this knowledge and exposure that it may have an impact in regards to interfacing with the communities and building a culture of support.
My personal hope is that all the work that you're doing is integrated into the city's health plan. And I'll give an example. when we have an emergency call that says the citizen is struggling with a mental health issue, oftentimes the police come and the sheriff comes, and the way they operate together really makes a difference in that one person's life. That's personal. I live here in Alexandria. And I recently saw the police come, the sheriff, and they were struggling with, not struggling, but trying to figure out the right thing to do. The issue was that some of the citizens who were watching it weren't aware of the training that's involved in handling that case. And so we have an obligation not just to work with the staffs and the sheriff, but to inform the community too. So what I've offered to you, Sean, is when we get a chance to talk about mental health as it affects our workforce, let's think about how we better inform the community. So a conversation with you and Kate Garvey or Dr. Rose or Mr. Perijan goes a long way toward making sure mental health is an easy conversation to have in the city. Right now, it's still difficult. If you're a black man and you don't want to talk about mental health in some cases, and GiShawn, you can, being from South Carolina, you certainly can attest to growing up in the South with stigmas in black families. Am I right?
Right, absolutely right.
So when we address those stigmas, Sean, I think it works well. So one of the things that I would like to personally see is that as we move forward, those lessons learned, those conversations, those elevator pitches, that we all have it in our hands, so that when Sean is talking with the city manager or with senior citizen, that he has some ready points to share about how we can move the needle forward. And Sean, I know you do with Meals on Wheels. You're all over the city. So I hope we're spreading the word about what you're doing with Dr. Mance. Sean, you got a comment? You're still muted, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have to spread the word, and we're finding ways and looking at methods of how to do that. But we have to, take what we're learning, and we like Colonel Page says, we've got to pass it on to the community, and we have a responsibility to reduce that stigma in our community as well. So we got to find ways to do that, and CCNA has been a big part of that. And we have to work with the city to find other ways to do that, because you can never do it enough. Once you've started, you can't stop, and we have to continue to do it because it's always going to be an ongoing issue.
Right. Same thing for you, Dr. Mance, in your network at Howard and across your sorority and all the things that you do domestically and across the country. Let's continue to spread the word about what you're doing here in the city. There's an image in my mind as a Alexandrian, is to see you, Dr. Mance, a black professional female and a white sheriff looking at the issue as partners. So in my opinion, that impressions and visuals make a difference in how we get our word out. So if I looked at the screen now thinking, what's the connection between Sheriff Casey and Dr. Mance and Kelly? Well, we're all concerned about mental health. So I think the common thread for me is continuing to build partnerships with and among all of us. So when Chief Smedley doesn't have to reinvent the lessons learned that Sean just learned. So how do we pass that on to the next project here in the city? So give that some thoughts. I've got a couple other questions and a couple of things I want to cover before we leave. We're looking at budget. Sean, do you have a budget for mental health? Do you put that in your budget?
No. I would say there is not a specific part of our budget that's dedicated to mental health. I think that it's expected within the overall budget that we're provided is that we have to find ways to use that money and direct it towards mental health resources. So for example, this training that we're doing right now, we're dipping into our overtime budget to ensure that all of our staff are able to attend it, and we still have coverage inside the jail and the courthouse and in the community. So that's always an issue. And I think when it comes to budgets and mental health, there's the same stigma, right? There's a stigma that, we don't really need money for mental health, or we don't need money for that. There's money that's more importantly spent other places, right? That's why we are where we are right now with mental health and the issues that we're having. I mean, we're having the same issue in the state where there's not enough mental health beds for mental health consumers in the state. So you have folks who are sitting in the hospital for days and hours up to no end instead of being inside a treatment facility because there hasn't been the proper investment at the state level in our mental health ability. And I would say that transfers down everywhere, is that we're behind the eight ball on this. And thankfully, Dr. Mance and her students, we've come up with a collaborative partnership that we're able to sustain within our own budgets to make this happen, which is huge. And that's how we're going to get this done. It's the only way we're going to be able to get it done. But I'm hoping with our partnerships that we have here, and Colonel Page, with your work with CCNA, that this will open up more doors and maybe more financial funding in the future that can be specifically dedicated towards mental health, both for our staff and for external consumers as well.
Dr. Mance, you have any thoughts on budget and how you're funding your efforts?
That's a great question. Even at the training level, we have struggles with budget as well. And Kelly could probably speak to this, just as graduate students, just making sure that we have funding for our graduate students so that we are training the next generation so that they can provide the services. And that's one of the things that with our program at Howard University that we struggle with, is being able to provide that funding for our students. And what that does sometimes is create a stressor for the provider, right? So the stressor meaning the trainee. So it's even an additional stressor that our students have while we're kind of training them to be able to provide mental health services. At the same time, is really important. We emphasize that they take care of themselves and their own mental health while trying not to add a stressor to their lives. And in essence, indirectly, we end up doing that because we can't always have a full funding, meaning tuition and a stipend. And that can be very stressful for students. So then they are working an additional job while having an externship, while partnering with communities, while taking classes. And so there's just a lot of stressors that we're at that essentially being added because we're not prioritizing from a budget standpoint in funding initiatives, funding programs so that we can address essentially a public health concern. Mental health is a public health issue, right? And really giving emphasis and prioritizing that.
One of the occurring issues with mental health is to treat the business side of it. There's a cost for good health care and access to health care. So part of this project, I hope we come out with some lessons learned that we can put into the hopper and talk about how do you fund this? How do you have better access for all of our citizens is my personal event. Kelly, one question for you before we start to summarize. You've been in this program now for almost a year. What is your bottom line? How do you feel about being in the program?
I mean, I think being in the program has been just a wonderful opportunity. I've gotten to, to Dr. Mance's point, learn more about social justice and addressing accessibility. And that's actually what I've become really passionate about because think about it. Dr. Mance has already spoken to accessibility in terms of being a graduate student, and that kind of in turn affects how many mental health professionals there are to be able to actually provide these services. And then a lot of the people that we work with already don't have access, whether it be transportation to go to a hospital and get treatment services. So I think what I've become really passionate about is addressing social justice and making sure that I'm, again, checking in with the community, because it's easy to speak on the issues that people are going through, but to actually have those conversations with the people that you're treating, I think that is even more valuable than anything. And I just appreciate Howard's program for prioritizing that, because it's something that a lot, and also what I will note is that with Howard, there is a very big focus on cultural humility. And a lot of programs say, oh, we're culturally competent, but Howard's program really does a good job of actually emphasizing cultural humility and working with the communities who represent the populations that we're actually going to work with. So that's kind of what has been really valuable in my experience so far.
We're glad to have you in the city. We're coming almost time for summary. I want to go back at the top of the program to make sure that we all agree what success is for today. Our goal was to talk about the project and to talk about your partnerships between Dr. Mance and the sheriff and the city. I want to make sure that we stress that. So, Sean, your thoughts on the value of partnerships, please.
The value of partnerships are invaluable. You can't put a price on them. The partnership that we've had the opportunity to develop, Colonel Page with CCNA, has led us to the outstanding partnership we now have with Dr. Mance, where we're getting it done. We are getting mental health resources and training for our staff, and that's going to benefit our community in extraordinary ways, and it's going to benefit our staff personally, and it's through that partnership that this is happening, and it's a partnership that's built on uh, our willingness and our belief that this is important. And I think that's what brings us to the table, is that we believe strongly that these type of this type of training and this type of awareness for mental health is important. It's vital, and it has to be done. And we're finding a way to get it done through this partnership. And like I said, these partnerships are invaluable, and we wouldn't be able to do the job we do today without them. So thank you, Dr. Mance, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Colonel Page, for your partnership, and CCNA for your partnership in this outstanding, one of the many outstanding ventures that we're all involved in right now.
Dr. Mance, can you give us your thoughts and mention APAF and the work that you're doing with Raul Andrews and his organization, along with the sheriff? Can you roll your comments into that?
Sure, absolutely. I definitely want to echo some of the sheriff's comments in regards to how invaluable the partnerships are in regards to kind of really addressing this issue of mental health. It's very easy to kind of stay within your own lane, but we're so much more impactful and stronger when we are kind of working together and collaborating and building upon each other's strengths. Right. And the reach can go so much further when we're able to do that. And so with the work with CCNA kind of making the connection, working with Sheriff Casey, who's just been very, very generous with his time, being available with the employees, and just kind of saying, hey, start with my organization. Yes, I'm on board. Just being able to get that yes. And then working with American Psychiatric Association Foundation with Raul Andrews, and how the initiatives that he has in regards to addressing workplace mental health. I served on a panel with him probably about 3 weeks ago for a conference in regards to workplace mental health, and just kind of, again, having those discussions, and that partnership it widens the reach. It allows the message to go so much further. And again, it's just that chipping away. Right. It's going to be slow and steady, kind of chipping away to have these conversations that are invaluable, but moving beyond the conversation and actually implementing, having initiatives, like, for example, the partnership between Howard University and the Alexandria City Sheriff's Office, where we are kind of like, hey, let's start here. We could go with workshops, then we move. So again, slow and steady, and we're chipping away and having significant and very strong impact.
We've got another mental health power breakfast coming up soon, and the guest speaker is going to be Kelly Garrett. She's going to be our guest presenter. We've got a couple minutes left. Sean, I'd like for you to, just on a personal note, Black History Month, you had a special guest who presented to your staff and to your inmates. You want to talk about that real quick?
Yes. So we had started to build that partnership with Dr. Mance, and as Dr. Mance so eloquently put it, about how we slowly started to ingratiate Dr. Mance and her team into our organization, because of their willingness to be part of our organization, of course. And when me and Latanya Irving, my director of inmate services, thought about, well, what should we do for Black History for our inmates, because we usually do a pretty robust Black History program. Who should be our guest speaker? And immediately, I think we both said at the same time, Dr. Mance, and we asked, and she immediately accepted, and she brought herself and her team together, and she gave an outstanding and very moving outline of the history of mental health in the Black community. And it was fascinating. Then her team did some mindfulness exercises with some of the inmates, with all the inmate population. There was a lot of sharing that went on between the inmates and Dr. Mance and her staff in a very public forum. It was a very powerful ceremony that ended in song, and it was great. It was wonderful, and it goes back to those partnerships, right? Those are just invaluable. So it was a great program, and we loved it.
Thank you.
Great. Our time is near. It's practice over. To each of you, all of you, thank you for spending Saturday morning with us. More to follow, and go Bisons.
Thank you.